you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to Open Discussions and the Gulf Cultural Club for having organised tonight's timely discussion, and thank you too for having invited me to participate in this. Before I commence with my speech, I would like to convey my heartfelt wishes to the Iranian people on the 42nd anniversary of the Great Iranian Revolution of 1979, the most important revolution in world affairs since the glorious Cuban Revolution of 1959. First and foremost, the Iranian Revolution threw off the yoke of American and British tyranny and subjugation in Iran and returned the country to the Iranian people. Accordingly, ancient Iranian honor, which spans thousands of years, stemming back to the Persian empires of Cyrus the Great, Xerxes the Great, and Darius the Great, was restored and has been upheld ever since by the Iranian Revolution. Secondly, as a result of the Iranian Revolution, Iran today is a crucial bulwark against terrorism, with the Iranian state having first prevented the Taliban's tentacles from expanding into the Middle East, and then with the Iranian state having played the cardinal role in the defeat and destruction of ISIS in Iraq, and having served a majorly important role in the defeat and destruction of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. There are numerous other benefits which the Iranian people and others have come to enjoy as a consequence of the Iranian Revolution, such as the Lebanese people, whose country on its southern border is heroically defended by Hezbollah from Israeli aggression. But there is one benefit springing from the Iranian Revolution which is particularly significant for all of mankind. At a time when moral degeneracy and depravity has attained, through the support of Western politicians and journalists, either legitimacy or legality in Western societies, in which, for instance, the rights and safety of children and women is under threat from a diabolical agenda carried out under the cover of liberalism and progressiveness, and protected by the tyranny of political correctness, Iran stands out as a beacon of hope and inspiration to people in the world of all ethnicities, cultures, and religions, because the Iranian state vigorously and relentlessly defends Iranian society from the dark advances of that so-called progressive agenda, which has replaced morality and religion in the West with debauchery. The Iranian Revolution has preserved in Iranian society religion, patriotism, family values, the rights and safety of women and children, and morality. The Iranian Revolution will never, ever countenance in the emergence of sexual perversion in Iranian society, with the Iranian state demonstrating to the rest of the world that love of God, country, and people is the antidote for the preservation of morality and humanity. I'm encouraged by how increasing numbers of ordinary Britons and Americans, especially those who have young children, are expressing words of praise for Iranian politicians and journalists who, unlike for their British and American counterparts, will not tolerate any discussion of legitimizing, let alone legalizing, depravity in Iran. Time and time again, I, as a British person, have had fellow Britons express the following sentiment to me. If British politicians and journalists were like their Iranian opposites, then the British national identity would never have been eroded and replaced with, instead, a soulless identity comprised of celebrity culture, reality television, drugs, and pornography, coupled with depraved values attached to this. In summing up Iranian society, it is suffice to say that Iran constitutes a safe space for religious, cultural, and moral people, as well as a safe space for women and children whose rights and safety are firmly enshrined in Iranian law, as established by the Iranian Revolution. Now, turning to the subject matter in hand tonight, a most peculiar phenomenon occurs in the world each and every time a new American president assumes office, in which a discussion is heard about whether American foreign policy will change, implicitly for the better, under the new incumbent. Such a discussion is both tiresome and nonsensical, for it demonstrates a complete ignorance of the actual structure of the American government. Despite what the United States Constitution asserts, an American president does not, in practice, wield tremendous powers. In fact, ultimate power in America, including foreign policy making, rests with the American establishment, which is comprised of, amongst others, dynastic oligarchies, such as the Bushes, the Clintons, and the Rockefellers, the military-industrial complex, the Central Intelligence Agency, the banking system, corporations, pharmaceutical giants, mainstream media, and lobby groups. When a new US president enters the Oval Office, the aforementioned groups surround him and instruct him as to how the political and economic system in America is to be preserved and how the American empire is to be advanced. It matters not if the president is Democratic or Republican, for the Democratic and Republican parties exist only to maintain the facade that America is a democracy. In essence, these parties are very much part of the American establishment and work in unison behind the scenes to secure the American political and economic structure at home, which accrues great riches for them, and to secure and expand American global hegemony. It is for those reasons why American foreign policy, whose overriding tenet is the expansion of America's mastery of the international scene through political or economic or cultural or military means, remains the same under each and every American president. Methods can differ, but the aims remain the same. So, for instance, Barack Obama, who we were told, rather idiotically, by American and British liberals, would usher in a peaceful and ethical American foreign policy, turned out to be one of the most violent and murderous of American presidents in recent times. Someone whose drone wars in Afghanistan and in Pakistan resulted in the deaths of thousands of civilians there, including women and children. Someone whose intervention in Libya in aid of Al-Qaeda there resulted in the country becoming a failed state and one home to terrorism and human slave markets, comprised of sub-Saharan Africans in its capital, Tripoli. Someone who aided a Wahhabist insurgency led by Al-Qaeda and later ISIS in Syria, causing the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Syrian civilians, again, including women and children. Someone who gave America's consent to Saudi Arabia to prosecute a monstrously horrific war against the people of Yemen, who happen to be the poorest people in the Middle East. And someone who gave his approval to American special services to engineer and carry out a coup involving the use of neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine against the country's democratically elected president, resulting in a civil war in the east of Ukraine, claiming the lives of thousands of civilians there, again, including women and children. It follows, therefore, that American foreign policy under the new US president, Joe Biden, will not change, despite the dull-witted arguments to the contrary as put forward by liberals in the Western world. I must make something abundantly clear at this point. I said on television and in speeches leading up to and at the very outset of Donald Trump's presidency that American foreign policy would not change under him too, and my stance was vindicated. So America will remain the same old America under Biden, an actuality which will be especially the case concerning countries in geostrategic parts of the world which pursue independent foreign policies, and which Washington seeks to subvert so as to turn them into American vassal states, such as Iran. Before I address how the Biden presidency will approach Iran, it is necessary to examine Biden's position on the country when he served as Obama's vice president. As vice president, Biden helped to dramatically increase American support to the MEK terrorist organization, which has been targeting and spilling the blood of Iranian innocents for decades, with the overall desired aim of this hideous organization being to overthrow the Iranian authorities and return Iran to how it had been during the years of the Shah, namely a client state of both America and Britain. The surge in support which MEK received from Washington when Biden was vice president included the Obama administration establishing training camps for MEK in Albania, a recently acquired colony of America. Preceding the Obama administration's increase in support to the MEK can be found another dangerous anti-Iranian move by Obama and Biden. At the behest of Mrs. Obama and Biden, Capitol Hill approved the Comprehensive Iran Sanctions, Accountability and Divestment Act of 2010, which augmented existing American sanctions on Iran. Now, Biden and Obama were both fully aware of how tightening sanctions on Iran would intensify the suffering of ordinary Iranians. For Washington, sanctions, in part, severely restrict the importation of medicines to the country, including those to treat cancer, and medical equipment, such as dialysis machines. Furthermore, claims by Biden and Obama in 2013 that the US had eased sanctions on exports of medical goods to Iran proved to be disgustingly spurious. The very simple truth is that Biden and Obama were both guilty of having committed crimes against humanity in their deliberate targeting of ordinary Iranian people, including women and children. Finally, when the Trump administration assassinated General Qasem Soleimani in January of 2020, Biden's only concern about the brutal slaying of a man who masterminded the defeat of ISIS in Iraq and who played an invaluable role in defeating ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria was to say about the potential knock-on effects that this action might have had on American interests in the Middle East. Biden said, and I quote, "No American will mourn Qasem Soleimani's passing. He deserved to be brought to justice." Biden's sentence, "be brought to justice," was parlance for Soleimani deserved to be killed. Thus, another example of Biden's loathing of the Iranian state. Incidentally, Biden's veiled words in support of the murder of General Soleimani was an example of the traditional diplomatic language of both American and British officialdom when publicly expressing their support for acts of violence and murder in the international arena. In concluding, Biden's antipathy to Iran, as evidenced during his time as Obama's vice president, is clear for all to see and is indisputable. Thus, he has entered the White House with the same prejudices towards the Iranian state that his predecessors possessed. His clouded judgment about Iran and Iranians will be apparent for the world to see during his tenure in office. Turning to the Iran nuclear agreement, it is folly to interpret the decision of the Obama administration to sign America up to this landmark accord as evidence of Obama and Biden's conciliatory approach to Iran. Rather, it wasn't an attempt by Obama and Biden to safeguard America's interests in the Middle East by averting either a war between Israel and Iran or a war between America and Iran. That explanation can be made all the more persuasive by taking into consideration that at the time of the signing of the Iran nuclear agreement in 2015, America was heavily involved in waging a proxy war in Syria, as well as supporting Saudi Arabia's military campaign in Yemen. Accordingly, not even a superpower would have wanted to be drawn into a full-blown conventional war with a strong opponent, Iran, when, simultaneously, it was overseeing military campaigns in two countries in the vicinity, Syria and Yemen. Nonetheless, that Obama and Biden made the US a party to the Iran agreement, irrespective of their motives, is to be commended, just as Trump's peace talks with North Korea is to be commended. Biden as president will, like his predecessors since the presidency of Ronald Reagan, abide by the American establishment's objective to continue with attempts to weaken Iran and explore new ways of trying to undermine the Iranian authorities in the hope that such actions could one day pay dividends with the destruction of the Iranian Revolution and the installment of a pro-Western puppet government in Tehran. Now, Biden has spoken about America returning to the Iran agreement. following Trump's withdrawal from it in 2018. Biden's proclamation is audacious, given that Tehran has said that Biden must first of all rescind the sanctions which Trump placed on Iran in order for America to come back to the agreement, while Biden insists that Iran must cease in raising uranium enrichment above the levels of volume and purity as set out in the agreement, something which, it must be said, the Iranians have every right to do following Trump's withdrawal. This provision is laid out in the text of the agreement, covering a scenario in which one of the other parties chooses to no longer be a signatory to the accord. I am of the opinion that there are conflicting groups within the American establishment concerning the Iran agreement. Whilst the American establishment is unified and resolute in its determination to destroy the Iranian Revolution, there are some elements in it who believe that the last 10 years has witnessed a tremendous amount of American resources being directed into the Middle East, Libya, Syria, and Yemen, and that now is not the appropriate time to enter into a military conflict with Iran. They argue that, instead, America needs time to recuperate so that the country would be in a much better position upon which to directly set about overthrowing the Iranian authorities. Hence, the argument goes, Washington should rejoin the Iran agreement, essentially to buy time for Washington to prepare for a later showdown with Tehran. However, the opposing element within the American establishment believes that now is actually the right time to confront Iran, because before the country becomes more powerful politically, economically, and militarily. Hence, America must not return to the Iran deal. This faction is also alarmingly conscious of how Iran will, over time, benefit exceedingly from its newfound strategic partnership with Russia. Whichever faction within the American establishment prevails will determine which course of action Biden adopts with regard to the Iran Accord. Turning to how America's relations with its allies in the Middle East will fare under Biden, it is most certainly the case that differing opinions amongst the groups which comprise the American establishment over the Iran agreement may cause some tension between the US and Israel and the US and Saudi Arabia. The Israeli and Saudi states are two of Washington's most important of allies in the international arena in general. Naturally, Tel Aviv and Riyadh are vociferously opposed to America rejoining the Iran agreement and instead favor America embarking on a military campaign to destroy the Iranian revolution and topple the Iranian government. That all said, however, even if America should once again become a party to the agreement, the mighty US relationship with both Israel and Saudi Arabia will not be impaired in the slightest, because American predominance in the Middle East rests upon Israel and Saudi Arabia, while Israel and Saudi Arabia's survival rests upon America. Further to that, Biden will not reverse the decision taken by Trump on moving America's embassy to Jerusalem, and nor will Biden revoke Washington's decision, also under Trump, to recognize Israeli sovereignty over the illegally occupied Syrian Golan Heights. Let us not forget that Biden identifies himself as a Zionist. As regards Saudi Arabia, the Wahhabist kingdom is crucial to American control of oil in the Middle East. Hence, no US president would ever be allowed by the American establishment to seriously damage ties with Saudi Arabia. A Biden presidency seeking to capitalize on the normalization of relations between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Israel and Bahrain, which Biden so enthusiastically rejoiced over, will strive to enlist further Arab countries in establishing relations with the Jewish state, as this will serve to increase Israel's standing in the Middle East, which in turn will increase America's standing in the region. After all, Israel is the main conduit for American power in the Middle East. I suspect that Saudi Arabia, which has long had an unofficial strategic partnership with Israel, will be called upon by Biden to adopt measures which will make these informal relations between Riyadh and Tel Aviv formal. So in concluding, what Iran can expect from a Biden presidency is what Iran has been subjected to by the US ever since the Great Iranian Revolution of 42 years ago. namely a continuation of attempts by Washington to destroy the Iranian Revolution through economic warfare, though a direct military attack on Iran by the US under Biden cannot be excluded, especially in light of how the Democratic Party has surpassed the Republican Party in its appetite for wars of intervention. Alas, Iran, a sovereign and independent country which has never attacked anyone and which is indispensable to the Russian-led campaign in the world to tackle the scourge of Western-supported Al-Qaeda and ISIS terrorism, will continue to have its national security menaced by an America which has a traditionally insatiable lust for power, wealth, domination, and war. Nonetheless, the ancient and indomitable Iranian people have withstood aggression against their country for 42 years now and have not yielded an inch to Washington. Biden will not succeed in his wicked endeavors to bend the unbendable will of the Iranian people. Thus, Biden will join the ranks of Reagan, Bush Sr., Clinton, Bush Jr., Obama, and Trump in having had their malignant tentacles firmly blocked by the iron resolve of the Iranian people to preserve, at any price, Iran's independence, love of God, culture, and dignity. I salute the Iranian people on the anniversary of their mighty revolution. Thank you for listening. Allow me, first of all, to reiterate a point, a submission I made during my speech. It is preposterously fanciful to argue that there will be real, meaningful changes to American foreign policy under Joe Biden. Why? Because that ridiculous argument has no basis. It has no precedent whatsoever. When George Bush Jr. entered the White House, he said that he wanted to make amends with Russia because towards the end of Clinton's tenure in office, relations between Washington and Moscow began to wane. Well, we all know how relations seriously deteriorated between Russia and America under George Bush Jr. And then when Obama entered the White House, he said that he's going to reset relations with Russia. Well, relations between Russia and America under Obama dropped to levels which had not been seen since the most dangerous episodes of the Cold War. Essentially, Trump entered office with relations between Washington and Moscow at a truly atrocious level. So there is no evidence to cite in support of the argument that there will be real significant change to American foreign policy under Biden, because there never is any major change. Yes, methods can vary, but the ultimate aim remains the same. Now, turning to internal politics in America, America has long been a divided country, and historically, that division has been based on class. There are immense numbers of people who are living below the bread level in America. Some 44 million Americans indeed live below the bread level. So America is traditionally a very divided country as a result of class. But in recent years, a new division has emerged. And that division is on account of the liberal component of the American establishment, or I should really call it a neo-liberal component, because they're not actual liberals. They're certainly not liberals in the sense of David Lloyd George or Henry Asquith. They are neoliberals. The neoliberal elite, the components within the American establishment, has over the last 20 years or so attempted to impose its culture, its values, which we can sum up as a Hollywood culture, on America. And vast swathes of the American population consider that culture to be utterly alien to them. They consider that culture to be utterly depraved. We hear neoliberals in the form of politicians and journalists, and also actors and other such public figures in America talk about things which only a few years ago would have been unthinkable. We have neoliberals in America talking about the need for children as young as 5 and 6 to be taught in schools about how to masturbate. That is a serious problem now in America, and it is also a serious problem in Britain. So America's divisions, historic divisions, have become more acute. And we can say that the change in society in America started to occur in the late 60s, because prior to the late 60s, an American film did not feature a man and a woman kissing each other. That was strictly prohibited. American society prior to the late 1960s was a very religious one, a very Christian one, a very moral one. There was no violence in American films. There was no violence on American television sets. There was no acts of sexual intercourse in American films up to that point. However, from the late 1960s, the first emergence of this neoliberal culture began to manifest itself. Now, yes, it is true that Biden, or indeed if Trump had remained as American president, would be to a very large extent consumed by these very dangerous divisions within America. And yes, it is possible that one day, not for the foreseeable future, but one day, secessionism could emerge in America. And if it does, it will emerge in the southern states of America, because the southern states of America remain a very religious part of the country. They regard the Hollywood culture, which is the basis of the neoliberal culture, as a devilish one. Now, will America face the same problems that the Russian Federation faced in the early 1990s? Well, the Russian, yes, but for very different reasons. The Russian Federation faced the possibility of territorial disintegration because Moscow, to a large extent, lost control of the North Caucasus, Chechnya, Ingushetia, and Dagestan. But in America, secessionism could emerge because vast swathes of the American population believe that this marriage between northern states and the southern states is not working. People in the southern states believe that a divorce is necessary. But, and I just want to conclude here, America is a superpower politically, economically, militarily, and in nuclear terms. America can deal with divisions at home and deal with numerous challenges or challenges it perceives to its world dominance. It can deal with the divisions at home as well as dealing with Russia, dealing with Venezuela, dealing with Cuba, dealing with Syria, and dealing with North Korea simultaneously. American foreign policy will first and foremost be focused on Russia, because Russia is again a superpower. Russia is the only country in the world that can truly challenge American global hegemony and defeat American geostrategic objectives. Russia played the cardinal role in defeating the American objective in Syria. Russia played the cardinal role in ensuring that the American attempted coup in Venezuela failed. So America can deal with simultaneous challenges at home and abroad. And as regards to China, yes, there is a trade war between America and China, but remember, the American and Chinese economies are interlocked. They need each other. The Chinese economic miracle, which began under Deng Xiaoping, has been overwhelmingly based on China's trade with America and its investment in America. It is not in the interests of either Beijing or Washington for there to be a severance in those trade and investment relations between the two. So China is not a challenge to American global hegemony. It is Russia that poses that challenge.